No problem.
Hi, all our
Hi.
guests. We are now speaking about different approaches and systems of astrology.
Mhm.
This is my friend Israel Ajose.
Hello. Great to be here.
Yes,
Yeah, great to be
I'm
here as
Betsalel
always.
Arieli. So, what do you think is the difference between modern astrology and those systems and schools of astrology that were in the past?
Yeah, there are I suppose there are many different schools or different I believe that each era, if you want to say, each era or each epoch will mark a time maybe where I feel astrology tends to take on sort of like an expression of the times. So astrology is it gets to be modeled in a way due to it's the people, the place, the time, So in the past there has been many different, if you want to say, approaches, although the fundamentals are the same in a sense. We're still dealing with planets, zodiac signs, houses, aspects, things like that. But additional things or remodeled things, standardized things get standardized as time goes on. So for the astrology which was practiced like 2-3 thousand years ago would often be referred to as traditional astrology. Very often today, when people are using that word traditional astrology, they're often referring to Hellenistic Greek. Very often, that's where. But Hellenistic Greek also as well was also built on earlier civilizations. It took from earlier civilizations
I
like.
think we don't know much about earlier. We know in some general way about Mesopotamian astrology,
Yeah.
but not much, not really some working practice of astrology, just pieces of knowledge which are very um, with some ambiguity without clear presence of what this was.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
for Hellenistic astrology, I think we really don't know what happened in all this astrological field.
No, there's enough information. There is quite a lot. Um, uh, um, it's just that obviously the way, I mean, so for example, in Egyptian or Babylonian Mesopotamian astrology, very often the astrology there was it was more for the king or for the nobles or for the royals. So this was one of the reasons why we don't really get a lot of data like we do maybe in the Hellenistic, because for then it became more accessible for everyday people, even though it was more for the upper class, but it was still more accessible. So we don't really, you often find a lot of descriptions or talks in the Chaldean or Babylonian where they speak about omens, they spoke about eclipses, very much what kind of things that they would expect, whether if a season was going to be famine or otherwise. So they definitely did astrology. Babylonian astrology actually, they more emphasized on planetary aspects and planetary positions. That was mainly their thing. And then you have again Egyptian astrology also as well. They also were mapping the heavens again in a very similar way to like the Babylonians as well, dealing with planetary rising, setting. They really focused on the helical rising and the setting of planets that were rising before the sun, after the sun. They were also the ones who divided the zodiac, into the 10 degrees, which we now know as the decans or the faces. This came from those cultures, from the Egyptian, Babylonian cultures. They were the ones who were doing those systems. But Hellenistic became an amalgam of that. It took from the Babylonian, the Egyptian, and it again updated it, standardized it for that module, and it became more a bit more widely accessible, and this is where we start having documentation of people's charts and things of that nature. So, although it's not as I mean, the earliest astrological writing that we have documented belongs to the Babylonians. The oldest one we have is belongs to the Babylonians. Astrological data, I'm talking about here, belongs to the Babylonians. And then, of course, we have Egyptian, and then obviously, but it's not as maybe just like what you said, not as informative. There are some ambiguities on certain things, which we later then see, of course, in the Greek Hellenistic. So the Hellenistic Greek period were really good at bringing astrology to a very good holistic kind of level to where it was practiced. Not to say it was not holistic with the Egyptians or the Babylonians. I would say it was equally, but that was for that time, of course, and how they practiced it. But we know that ancient civilizations, no matter how far back you go, they were dealing with some kind of astrology in terms of they were working with sun, moon, seasons, full moon, new moon. That even as basic as we may want to say that is, they were working with that. So yeah, but normally when people say traditional astrology, they tend to be referring to Hellenistic Greek. It tends to be going to that. That tends to be the source where they tend to go to. And then the likes of Ptolemy as well, writing the Tetrabiblos, which is kind of like in Western astrology or tropical astrology, is kind of like the Bible, that the go-to that all astrologers see as a kind of a very strong foundational, although there were other astrologers writing, but the Tetrabiblos seems to be the Bible that Western astrology seems to be built on. you know
Yes, and I think that as time passes, astrology becomes more and more accessible to people. This
yes.
ancient astrology almost doesn't speak much about uh, natal chart of the person. It
Mm,
speaks more about some great events like wars and
mm,
uh, changes of power in the
yeah,
state.
yeah,
Maybe today astrology is much more popular exactly because it speaks to simple people, to
yeah,
you, to me. It
yeah, yeah,
describes the
yeah,
character,
definitely.
the personality. I personally didn't find much in ancient astrology describing this personality or character traits. It's rather abstract to
Mm,
our perception of life, to
mhm,
what we see today as our problems, our interests. So maybe that's why not so many people today try to learn this ancient astrology.
mm,
And there are also many controversial things about how to use it. I
mm,
see that many authors, even medieval ones,
mhm,
not just ancient, even in medieval astrology,
yeah,
European or Arabic or Jewish, you see that they speak a lot about different correspondences. That
yeah,
these days, these plants, these animals belong to this planet, to this zodiac
mhm,
sign. There is so much information about all these
yeah,
correspondences, but they don't really explain you much how to use this, what
mm,
to do with all this information.
mm,
They don't give you any instruction with the checkbox number one, two,
mm,
three, what to
mhm,
use, what to do, how to use.
yeah,
I think this is a great difference in approach, in their relations to the people, to the readers. Because modern astrologers,
mm,
they try to help you. Please come and
mm,
use this information.
mm.
I think this is a very distinctive, even crucial point we can.
Yeah. Um, well, they did. The thing is like I said, each era takes on a different. Astrology has to be adapted to the times. And with the correspondences, what you find there, like what you were saying, maybe an animal or something of that nature, we have to remember that back in those times, it's not, of course, we still have those animals today, but we kind of live in a society that is a bit or a lot more detached from animal life. They were around animals all the time. You could get injured by an animal more easily. Maybe, let's say, in today's society, you interacted more. More people maybe were farmers. You had cattle, if at home, and things of that nature. So it's speaking to a different time and a different environment also as well, and that's the reason why. But the reason why the correspondences with animals was important because so obviously for people who may have been using astrology and wanting to know about maybe a particular animal, maybe a trade or something of that nature, they were able to understand the correspondences. Also, there's something about the correspondence, whether it's the planet or the sign. There's something about that planet, it corresponds to that animal based on the nature of that animal also as well. So they were drawing correspondences from that perspective. But it was also used in things like trade, and just like what you're saying, that's why I was saying earlier on in the Babylonia or Egyptian, the astrology chart as we now know it as an individual chart was more for the king. As a matter of fact, there was a time where astrology was only for the king, because they saw the king as a reflection of the country. So at one point, if the king was having a Saturn transit, then the country was having a Saturn transit, as far as they're concerned. Because if the king is not in a good state, then the country is not in a good state.
By
So
the way, I don't think that it's so correct in modern mundane astrology, because I personally have studied much and practiced with the different charts of different countries. I
yeah,
can see that there is a lot of difference between astrological chart of the country or the state and the chart of the ruler or leader. Maybe today
yes.
leaders don't have so much attachment to the country as it was previously in the past, because today you have presidents and prime ministers
Yeah,
who
yeah,
come
exactly.
and
Yeah.
go and
Yeah, exactly. So it's different. So this is what I'm saying. It's very important that we analyze how was the structure of that society. I think this plays a very key role in that. Back then, it was kings, and the king would be on the throne until he died. I mean, yes, you would have had noblemen or government or king officials who may could have gone and come, fine, but the emphasis was it was the king. So the king was a reflection of the country. The king was the reflection of God also as well on some level. So they used to use the chart on that scale. Okay, the king is going having a Saturn transit, so is the country. So that's how it was, and that's why we don't get very few or hardly any natal charts from the further you go back, the more absent it becomes. The more how forward we come to today, we start getting more access to having more charts. But medieval astrology is quite interesting because then, because of the trade from the east to the west and all these places along the Mediterranean, it allowed astrology to really flourish and become more accessible as it has been today. But again, they still had to make these correspondences because you were dealing with farmers and traders, and so you needed to know, okay, what and this is where the arising of the lots come in, for the different lots, the different, which were later called Arabic parts, but they were not Arabic. They were actually they actually came from the Hellenistic period. That's where they originated from. But then the medieval astrologers expanded upon that, and you have these different lots or different parts for wheat, for barley, for beer, for so you would also have ones also that were pertaining to animals and things like that. So you had to know which planet corresponded to which animal in terms of if you were trading with that on a mundane level, that's what, if a society was known for selling cows, is it going to be a good season this year for the cow industry, for the people selling beef, or whatever? So, yeah, the astrologer on a mundane level would be able to cast a chart for the country or for the
I also
nation.
think that
Yeah.
it can be for another reason as well,
Yes.
for more magical reason, because in
Yeah.
magical books of this era of medieval magic, for example, in different grimoires, you
Yeah.
see that some pentacles or talismans you need to make on, for example, on some skin of particular animal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you connect between astrology and magic, you see that all these plants and animals and gems and metals corresponding to planets,
Yeah.
it was used greatly in constructing different magical
Yeah.
things,
Hmm.
devices, let's say.
Yeah.
I don't really think that all those traders and farmers in medieval society were relying so much on astrology. Maybe it was not dedicated for them.
Mm.
Maybe astrology was more for those magicians or sages who
Mm.
try to influence things through different spiritual
Hmm.
astral channels. Let's put this
Mm.
that way. And that they don't really teach. They say you a lot of information, but they don't teach so much how to use it. It also can be the sign that they were not interested in spreading the knowledge. Mm,
Mm.
They were more interested in keeping this knowledge for themselves, for their students who can receive some instruction in some oral tradition
Mm.
without writing this instruction in books, because you see that in books there is really not so much explanation about how to use all this. I remember I
Mm.
have read many medieval astrology books like the beginning of wisdom of Avram ibn Ezra,
Ibn
or
Ezra. Yeah.
yes, or book of astrological teachings from Al-Biruni and
Mm.
other Arab or Muslim
Hmm.
astrologers.
Yeah.
Or, for example, take Guido Bonatti, Italian
Yeah.
astrologer of that time.
Yes.
They give you a lot of information about planets staying this way and that way in your chart, in
Mm.
rays of sun, out of rays of sun,
Yeah.
so many things. But they don't say what to do with all this. Do you need to check this in your chart this way or that way?
Most
The
definitely.
Yes, the problem, I think, even in modern astrology, for the beginners at least, the problem begins where when you need to combine all those pieces of information yourself. You need to combine them
Hmm.
to receive full picture,
Hmm.
some full description
Hmm.
of the chart of the person, of the some event which
Hmm.
you try to investigate, uh, because there are many pieces of information, but they don't explain how to combine all this, how to join those pieces into full picture. I believe that maybe this knowledge was given in some more secret ways, like some oral
Hmm.
tradition, which was not written in books
But
in that period of time.
I would slightly disagree with that. I think I would agree to it partially that there was some um, secretive element to it, and I don't think sometimes the secret element to it was malicious. Like I think it was more they were just trying to avoid certain
Well, I
uh,
also don't speak about malicious.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, I don't think it's malicious, as in, like, it was done to maliciously hide it from people. But I think they were just trying to. They didn't want to offend certain institutions, especially the
Mhm.
religious ones. So I think they had to be a bit careful from that perspective. I think that's one aspect of it. I also think another part of it is, again, it's just during those times. That's how they wrote. We tend to, us in this day and time, we tend to look back at history and we look at history through the lens of how we understand things now. and that's not how they thought then. So I think we also need to take that into consideration. And then the third part is that a lot of manuscripts have been destroyed and lost. I mean, when we speak about people like Project Hindsight, for example, Robert Hand, Robert Schmidt, and Robert Zola, the three Roberts who created the Project Hindsight, and I mean, the work which they have done and is still continue to be, translated is like remarkable, and to have this understanding like there are certain things that some of the things that you said that but they didn't give us, but perhaps they did, but it's been lost, destroyed. We don't have think for it, and sometimes this information comes up and it's like, oh, actually they did teach us, they did tell, but it for whatever reason the manuscripts got lost. So I don't think it's totally that it's a case that I do believe I agree with you definitely that there were some elements of a bit secret, and and back then it was very well known that traditional was oral. As a matter of fact, again, if we go back in time, the further you go back in time, the more oral the tradition was.
Yes,
Writing was just
certainly.
seen as a little shorthand kind of thing. It's only in the 16th century when the printing press came, and okay, we have this access to start printing, or so easily, it's readily accessible. We've become more reliant on terms of the books, whereas back then there would have been certain things that were just oral, it was just passed down, and it was everyday thing, but it wasn't really documented because, like, yeah, everybody knows this, right? That kind of thing. So nobody
Yes,
wrote it in the
it
book.
happens in all
Yeah,
traditions. We not
yeah,
not only in astrology, you see that the amount of books grows all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
For example, in religious traditions as well, we see,
yeah,
for example, like in Jewish tradition, where
yes,
all this Talmud and Gemara, it was
uh,
all written relatively late.
yes, yeah, yeah,
But about secrecy, I think that there could be some purpose to hide, especially if you compare astrology to alchemy, because
mhm,
alchemists really, it's I think it's obvious that they tried to hide much. They
yeah,
make their symbolism and expressions very, very uh, not clear, very.
yes,
Uh, you can say that they had multiple meanings in every word.
yes,
I think that astrology in those times and alchemy really stood very close to each other
yeah,
because you see everything was built on this system of correspondences. Maybe let's
yeah, I
try
agree.
to make some to look into this. How, for example, you personally understand this idea of correspondences? What does it really mean that plants, gems, characters, animals,
Yes,
metals, whatever, different places,
yeah,
different climate zones, they correspond to something? Let's
yes,
say to planets, or if we shall go, for example, to some other esoteric tradition, it can be corresponded to some angels
yeah,
or
yeah,
tree of life,
yeah.
Sphirot in Kabbalah. What is the idea of those correspondences?
Well, the correspondences, I think one of the reference that I speak about that kind of explains it quite well is the book known as the Kabbalion, written by the three initiates, and it speaks about the seven Hermetic laws. So the correspondence is, it's like a link, it's a connection, and it's letting us know that everything in this universe is connected with everything else. Nothing is independent of itself. So a planet, from a symbolic perspective, the energy of that planet. So if we, for example, take the planet Mars, for example, we know what kind of attributes in astrology Mars has, a number of keywords associated with him. We know he's a very hot planet. He's known for being hot, very dry. He's known for being very potent, very aggressive, so he has all of these attributes and characteristics and traits which is connected to it. So that is a again, like what they say in psychological astrology, it's an archetype, or what Jung coined the archetype. So it's an archetype. It's a pattern, right? And that pattern, it connects with certain things in nature. So there are particular animals that have that kind of characteristic, that trait also as well. There are gemstones that have that kind of energy. There are plants that have that kind of energy. There are, if you go into herbalism, for example, each plant, some plants are very known for being, very cool and very calm. Some are very, plants are very hot for nature. So if we look at something like a pepper, when you eat a pepper, it's very hot, it's very spicy. So they were able to correspond the nature of that plant or that herb to Mars. So Mars rules peppers. It makes sense once you start making the correspondence. So the correspondence is letting us know how everything is linked with everything, but also how we can also be able to devise, the planets, for example, and how they are corresponded with certain animals, plants, food, a kind of weather, for example. So each planet has a particular kind of weather. So when it's a Martian weather, we know it's very hot, it's very dry kind of weather. If it's a moon kind of weather, it's going to be a more moist or wet or something like that. So each one, or Mercury weather is windy. So each one has a particular correspondence, and that's the way I understand correspondences to be. They allow us to understand how everything is interconnected, how a planet is connected to, whether it's a mineral, a gemstone, because the gemstone also gives off that kind of energy, that frequency, and maybe sometimes we might see it in its color also as well, and how that is connected, and a plant, a food, an animal, and so on and so forth.
So we speak about some similarity between
Yeah,
things.
there's an affinity. There's an affinity, if you want to say similarity. I don't think similarity is quite justified, because similarity is kind of like, well, I would use similarity, but maybe put it in a bit of brackets. But I would use the word. I think the word which they use, correspondence, is very appropriate. Or we could say an affinity with that, or they're or use the word archetype. They're of the same fabric. They're of the same archetype.
Well, the idea is rather clear, and I think everyone who touches those things understands it's close to what you said.
Yeah.
But the difficult part of it is, can we measure in some way this real affinity, or all we can do is just to believe to those who delivered this information to us? If they revealed those similarities or affinities, can we ourselves also reveal such things, and how? Because
Yeah.
I think in modern occult or astrological or magical societies, they don't really know how to answer these things. They all they rely on the information which came from the past, from all
Mhm.
those sources, or they just drop the topic without any clear answer.
Mhm.
If there is some way to measure this affinity, does this plant more corresponding to Mars or to Sun or to something else? How can we do this?
Mhm. Yeah, I feel yes, we can do, and I feel it requires time, it requires research, it requires patience, which I feel sometimes today's approach lacks to some degree. Um, it's not like we just come with a conclusion overnight. Sometimes it's a work in progress. Just how we get new discoveries today, and we are able to. So, for example, when we look in astrology, like the planet Uranus or the planet Neptune or Pluto, these are planets which have just been discovered within the last 200-300 years, but yet we use them in astrology and we say, oh, Uranus does this, or Uranus does that, or Neptune does this. Well, how did we know that? How can we? It took time. It wasn't overnight. Hence why there were lots of debates. And you go back, you see the articles between astrologers because we had to look at, okay, when this planet was discovered, what was happening at that time? What was the kind of energies that was going on? Okay, when we see this planet go into a zodiac sign, or when we see it make an aspect to a particular planet, what other kind of manifestations do we get? What do we see? And it's through that then. So I feel that we can do with a lot of this. We can, and we will actually find that the ancients actually were bang on the button in most cases. In some cases, maybe not. We will always make improvements. We'll always make new discoveries. That's not a problem. But they were pretty much on the button in terms of they were able to live with these energies. I feel also as well we are living in a society that is very much detached from. You're talking about our ancestors of 2, 3,000 years ago. They were much more involved in everyday reality, everyday life. They were much more, if you want to say, integrated with nature. Not to say that we're not integrated with nature today, but we're a bit more, we see some things more separative. And I think they were living a more life integrated. So I think it was much more easier to them to come into face with these kind of things, and so they were able to make correspondences. But I don't think they just made it overnight. I don't think somebody just woke up one morning and said, "Oh, I think Mercury rules." Silver or something like that. No, I think it's
Quicksilver.
yeah, or Quicksilver. Yeah, I don't feel it's the same. I don't think it's the same. I feel it's over time, and then again, like you've mentioned, things like alchemy and magic and things like that, and have these things that's also developed as well, and have they've been all under one roof at one point. Astrology, magic, alchemy, and all of these sciences and knowledge. They've worked together over the years, so they've been able to make those correlations as time has gone along. So I think we can still do that today, and we will. People are we're finding new things. Science is always discovering new things, new elements, new whatever, and we can also make that as well. But I think it takes time. I think it's not simple as just, you know.
Well, but still, in all your speech, I don't hear some clear method how to do this. You just say that it doesn't happen
Yeah, yeah.
instantly.
Well, the first method is to study it, is to analyze it, is to watch whatever it is that whether it's a plant or whatever substance or energy, you watch its nature, you study its nature, start okay, what is this archetype, what kind of energy is it, and I think to analyze that, then you can then make the correspondence. You can see that, it seems like that. So basically it's analysis. This is what it comes down to. We've got to get into analysis. I think many a times people are looking for a quick thing. Well, what is that? No, well, okay, it's something new. It's not something that we've been using for thousands of years. Okay, so let's give it some time. How does it act? How is it acting? And then we can start making connections or correspondence as to what it's correspondent to. So I think we can do. We just need analysis.
Have you discovered yourself some new correspondence?
No, not really. No, it's not. I don't feel it's my expertise or my my field. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at. So, for example, if from my side, if I was to maybe use things like in terms of correspondences, maybe things like the tarot, for example, like certain tarot cards, I see like, oh, they have this maybe particular kind of nature. But I suppose from a scientific or hardcore scientific kind of explanation, that still would be also on that side of things, like it's not proven. But again, the proof is in working with it. It's by living it. It's by working with it, by engaging in it. Then the nature will speak to you, and then you
Well,
get the answer that way.
it can be done so as you describe, and I think many our contemporary students of astrology and other occult arts
Yeah.
do the same. But it looks more like some relying on your personal feelings or some subjective
Yeah, yeah,
subjective
yeah,
conclusions. So
yeah,
this is not, we just need to divide, I think,
yeah,
between some more objective and scientific way, if it's
yeah.
possible. And if it's not, we can rely on our personal feelings, but then we need to remember that other people can feel differently, and we can have much argument about those correspondences because I
Hmm.
feel that this corresponds to that and you feel differently. So
Yeah,
we lose some common ground if we rely only on our feelings.
yeah, no, definitely. I would not rely totally on feelings, but it sounds well. It's pretty clear that you are coming at things from a scientific perspective, or you want some
Well, I ask both.
scientific.
Yes, I look at both sides. I ask
Okay.
if there is some scientific way. All right. If it's there is not such a thing, let's look at something else. Maybe
Hmm.
really what we speak about is all about feelings and subjective impressions,
Mm.
personal impressions, without any scientific grounds. I can accept both cases.
Both,
Both
yeah.
ways.
I mean, for example, I've spoke with. I was on a Kabbalah course many years ago, and there was an astrophysicist there. I remember who was on the course, and I got talking with him, and he told me he's an astrophysicist, and at first I was quite shocked, quite surprised because I didn't expect somebody who is an astrophysicist to maybe necessarily, because very often the world of science and the world of metaphysics or spirituality disciplines tend to be at odds with each other. But I remember him telling to me that all of this stuff it can be seen and proven in the astrophysicist world or in the physics world. But what tends to happen is people who are, if you want to say, in control, or the ones who are doing the studies, are not interested to even give things like astrology, magic, alchemy a chance. The moment they even hear that word, they've shut off. So I feel like there is actually more out there than what we have been shown, or what is what we've been maybe led to believe. I feel that it's out there, but we may have to go more into the scientific world and get an understanding of how they are measuring or how they are not measuring. And I feel that's where I think us as maybe astrologers or alchemists and people of the metaphysical world may need to be tapping more into the scientific world.
Well, it would be interesting to hear from them, from scientists, or to see ourselves how, in a scientific way, you can prove such things. I personally believe that
Mm.
those correspondences really may have some maybe half subjective form, like music, for example.
Right. Okay.
No,
Okay.
probably that I also like to study music, and
Hmm.
especially in recent years, I think that music is such a field that have some nature of between the objective
And the
scientific,
subjective.
some strict scientific nature, and some more inner nature of feelings of emotions. Because music,
Yeah.
you see, it has some mathematical structure on one
Yeah.
hand, and on the other hand, it speaks to our feelings, to our emotions.
Yes.
So, for example, if I play the same chord in music, probably we all will hear the same, but our inner reaction may change through our personal state of mind,
Yeah.
our culture,
Most
our
definitely.
education, and so on. So maybe in astrology there is something like this. At
So
least
yeah.
I
Okay.
personally
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. I totally agree. But then would you then say, so for example, if we're talking, let's stick with music. So we have different types of music, for example, and we may have music which is okay. So for example, there are certain kinds of music that we can say is more aggressive maybe, or more, and there are music is more soft, or more, maybe more gentle in some kind of way. The different tempos of music. I don't think you see, the point I'm trying to ask is that nobody can disagree, or I suppose maybe somebody could disagree that if everybody was saying, well, this music sounds aggressive, we could we equally get somebody who says no, that's very calm, because there seems to be a general consensus around the different kinds of genres of music. People feel the same thing. They may be attracted, or it's going to affect different people differently. Point taken, but we all agree that this is a kind of a body kind of music. So I'm asking a question, but I'm also trying to also make the point that I feel we can have some kind of discrepancy as to the connection.
I think that's an excellent question. We need here to define more accurately what we really know about every musical element, not
Right,
just to ascribe to it different meanings, which can be very arbitrary. Because
right,
see,
okay,
if you all your education and all your experience in some particular culture, you can are in an arbitrary way you can ascribe some meanings to different musical elements just because you personally are used to hear this like that. But in different cultures or different people who are in different state of mind than you, they will not agree. So you're right that there is some basis, some, even we can say, some scientific basis
okay,
to this thing,
okay,
but we
yeah,
need to define it very accurately. What this interval or chord progression, what does it say really?
hmm,
And where we can take it with our implementation, with our when we build a song, for example, on this basis of chord progression, to
yes,
which place do we take it? So when we learn to divide, to distinct, make some distinction between this objective basis and then what we do with this is like some next stage or next level.
hmm,
Maybe the same is right about astrology. All those energies of planets and zodiac signs, they have some real basis, but still we in our lives, we see it all the time with our culture, with our uh, all the
mm,
influences which came to us from
yeah,
the surrounding world. So
yeah,
we sometimes we're just confused and can't really distinguish between energies themselves and
mhm,
those appearances which
yeah.
they take in our lives.
Yeah,
What I say about.
I totally agree with that. Cultures or way how we express ourselves may blur some of the lines, and not only just blur some of the lines, we could even get hybrids where we get blends or mixes of two kinds of energies. I mean, sometimes you do find that. You know, so for example, even in medieval astrology or traditional astrology, if you tend to look at the planet which rules snakes, for example, you will see the snakes are ruled by Saturn. But then there has been some astrologers or schools of thought, they say, oh, Mars, right? So, but again, they may be, they're looking at it because obviously a snake bites, and a bite is considered a Martian kind of thing. But a snake also wraps around it, it constricts its prey, so which is a Saturnian thing, and it's cold-blooded and thing. So there are particular reasons as to why they've ascribed it. Again, they've seen through the correspondence. So sometimes you can get a bit of a mix. So if somebody says, "Oh, yeah, snakes," they see snakes as a Martian kind of thing. It's not entirely incorrect, so to speak. So sometimes you do get these blends, right? And then you get some astrologers who say it's a Saturn Mars kind of animal, right? So you do get these kind of blends. But I feel if we really take time and learn how to whatever it is that we are focusing on, to just take time to analyze it and take it apart bit by bit, we will get to that final thing that we can. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be other things connected to it, but we can find the core thing that what that archetype which is driving this thing.
Yes, probably most of the things in our earthly world really are ruled by several planets, not just by one, or
Yeah.
receive influences from several places in some spiritual map, we
Mm,
can say. Because I also remember that in all this literature about occult correspondences, magical, astrological correspondences, really
mm.
it's all about the same. They always interfere those correspondences.
Yeah.
I recall now the book, three books of occult philosophy of Cornelius Agrippa,
Right. Yes.
Henry Cornelius Agrippa, who also has dedicated several chapters to this those correspondences.
Correspondences.
And you
Yeah.
can see that the same plants, for example, appear in the list of correspondences for Moon, and the same for Jupiter, or sometimes for Saturn, or sometimes for other planets.
Hmm.
So, and not only in his books, but in many different books, you will see
Yes.
the same. The only explanation I see is that those plants really receive influences from several planets. So that's
Yes.
why they appear here and there in different.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, some plants do have this kind of duality about them. Yeah, but I suppose again, when we're speaking about astrology charts or natal charts, we get the same thing. The sun sign, the rising sign, the moon sign, and depending on the aspects or the formation of the chart, they can, a chart can be multi-layered. Of course, we tend to stick with the sun sign as being a dominant factor, of course. But there are many people who are of the zodiac sign, which we see other elements. Maybe they're of one zodiac sign, their sun sign is in one zodiac sign, but maybe they have three or four planets in another sign, which seems like it dominates or is overriding the sun sign to the point where sometimes it's even very quite a bit difficult to see the sun sign, but we're seeing this other sign being really protruded. So I feel sometimes it's not, but at the end of the day, it still comes down to, it's like this approach of approaching they call something called the final dispositor in the chart. And there's a way of looking at the charts to be able to break down who is the dominant planet, who is the dominant factor. And sometimes you do end up with two, and in some cases maybe even three planets that are, it seems like they're all battling for the dominance of a chart. But in most majority of cases, maybe you do find it's one planet that is dominating. But that doesn't mean to say that there is not other influences also as well. And I feel that's the same thing with the correspondences. I feel it does come down to one plant, but sometimes there is a element of other things also as well. So a planet may be dominantly mercurial, but we may see a Saturnian element also to it as well, or Mars element too, or vice versa. And I think that's where that so it can seem like it's a bit blurry. Which one is it?
So it's all about making some tables or lists or other structures to structure the information about everything, because you will see all the time those interfering things, those interconnections, that one thing includes other.
Yeah.
And so maybe in our
They are
contemporary.
mitigating factors, we could say.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I really am a little bit suspicious about how could those sages and wise men in the past really reach so much knowledge, if you say that every such discovery really demands a lot of time, a lot of attention.
Hmm.
Maybe today, when we can, with our computers and other technologies, and even with artificial intelligence,
Yes.
we can really work with the thousands of charts, thousands of different
Yeah.
cases. Maybe today we are much closer to discover those correspondences and other connections. And I wonder
Yeah.
how those astrologers in medieval era, or even before, they could not really work with thousands of charts.
Yeah. Yes. But that doesn't mean to say, well, first and foremost, I think with the ancients, they some of those sages or scribes or whoever, they were also just copying their predecessors as well.
Right. That's simple.
That's nothing new. I think we're always going to get that. Even in today's society, we will get that, even with computers or AI. And yeah, so okay, we could say that we are extremely fortunate and we could check out hundreds of different charts. Um, the thing is, though, when we're talking about astrology, there is no two charts which are the same.
That's why
Um,
you need to check thousands to
well,
compare.
yeah,
Everything is built on comparison.
yeah, right, exactly. So, but no two charts are the same. So we will always get, of course, similar themes, of course, definitely, but no two charts are ever going to be the same. So I think that's a very important factor that we have to factor in. But I feel with the sages, yes, they've had plenty of time. Um, we have to remember half of the things that we are doing now, the distractions. If this, if we were discussing this topic 3,000 years ago, we would be standing face to face because we would not be on this kind of platform. Yeah, we would perhaps be amongst nature. We'd be observant of the helical rising of the stars and the settings and the So I feel we'd be more engaged, a bit more in the process of in what we were talking about as opposed to today. So I think there's always going to be pros and cons. I think back then, yeah, they spent years, hundreds of years, thousands of years, also gaining knowledge. And as time has gone, more and more knowledge has been accumulated as to where we have today. Um, and we can do what we are going to be able to do in 500 years time from now, 1,000 years time from now. The astrologers of then are going to be looking back at us saying, hey, look what these guys were doing. Oh my god, they didn't even know this, or they didn't know that, or they wasn't using this planet, or they didn't know have no knowledge of this planet. That's how it's going to be. So there's always more, basically. There's always more. So yeah, I agree with you totally. Like, especially with computers and with the information that we've got, yeah, we can run so many different charts and be able to make comparisons and to maybe make some some breakthrough
I
with
personally believe that
it.
there can really come some breakthrough
Yeah.
despite our times. We have so many not just skeptical minds, but even some we can say nihilist minds
Hmm.
today
Hmm.
who don't believe in anything, probably not only
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
astrology. But
Yeah.
still, I think that with all our technical base, we can really make much more sense out of the same old things which we received through tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and about speaking about different techniques of prediction
Mm.
or like progressions and transits,
Hmm. Yeah.
direction,
Mm.
primary
Yeah.
direction, secondary. I see that in astrological tradition, so many things like this are collected, and
Yes.
but they the question is if they really work all together, or it's more about finding one or several proper ways to
True.
use and throwing others away. Because I
Yeah.
see today every astrologer uses what they want. One uses only
Yeah.
secondary progressions,
Yeah.
another uses only transits. So, do we really think that all those techniques, ancient and contemporary, they really work on some level? Maybe they all interact with each other.
Yeah. I mean, from a traditional or medieval standpoint, there is no astrologer of who I have from the past. I'm talking that did one technique. It was that would have it was not heard of. The idea is that you use there's at least like five, six different combinations, and they were each different astrology, if you want to say predictive method, was used in its own way. So they had, for example, particular predictive techniques which would map out maybe more larger chapters of your life. So they would span maybe over a long period of time. So maybe 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years, or something like that. Then they would have more the ones that were shorter. So maybe for the year, that was seen for the annual, maybe for the year, and then there was ones that were used for the monthly, or and even getting it down to the daily also as well. So there were different, if you want to say, um, um, uh, uh, approaches or techniques that they would use. But you are correct in terms of in today's society, yes, different astrologers use different methods and they have their reasons, or maybe it's just like a preference. Maybe they like the way how that works. But I do feel that there may be a lot of astrologers who may be working a little bit, not to say what they're doing is not working, it's working, but I feel there can be more that's added to it. And I feel all of these systems work. I don't, regardless of which predictive or timing technique you want to use. As far as I am concerned, all of them work, but they work within a particular framework and a particular context. And
Yes,
that's why
probably.
sometimes, yeah, it may look like, oh, maybe it's off here and maybe it's not used for that context. I think we have to be define what is the context which it's working in and how to use it.
Probably they give some impact on some level, but since our reality and ourselves, we are so multi-leveled, we have so complex structure of our souls, our psyche,
Mm,
our body, whatever. So maybe they all work on some level, and
mm,
then real knowledge and the real art is to know how to conjoin all
mm.
this. When you
Yeah.
use, for example, as you have said now about using different techniques at once, if you use five or six, it will be very hard to combine and conjoin all the information you receive.
Well, it depends. Not necessarily because, like I said, I may be looking at I'm looking at various levels of time spans, and then there's a way. It's like it's in marketing. They talk about a funnel. So you funnel everything in. So you're working with a broader time scale versus different shorter time scales as well. So once you know where everything is and what is dictating everything, you're able to do it. It sounds like a lot like, oh, it's five. And I think this is also part of our problem in today's society. What going back to where you said, well, we're in because we have computers now and we can collect all of these data. I think we have to be very mindful that in the medieval and the traditional astrologers, this day, today, where you can have an astrologer who would have lots of different clients, it was not really like that back then. Some of these astrologers, they only they only had maybe one, because astrology was more for the affluent people, and you had one astrologer who was working in the court, because it's a lot of hard work. It's not just as simple as, oh, just bring up your chart and look at the transits. There's a lot of detail that has to go in, and this is why a lot of these techniques, it looks like a lot. Well, yes, it is a lot, and you have to focus on the chart for a long time and be able to do all the various calculations to understand where the person is at right now, as opposed to now, where because we've got access to computers, we could, just do in the ancient days, charts was drawn by hand and things like that. I mean, you could not afford to see maybe two, three clients in one day. Now perhaps you can do that because it's quite easy. So I think these are things that we also must take into consideration. So sometimes I think we're also looking for quick methods also as well that can give us these. And I'm not saying they don't work, but I'm just saying sometimes we may need a bit more.
I
than
agree
just
that we
maybe,
need more. I
yeah,
just say that it can be very difficult,
yeah,
especially if you don't know how to combine all the pieces. Because, for example, if you work with different methods that cover different periods of time, like
yes,
a secondary progression, for example, when
yes,
you speak about years, and
mhm,
some quick progression about months, and
yeah,
transit maybe about days or weeks,
yes,
and for example, if they all show the same, the picture will become very clear that this is what will happen. But
yeah,
if they show controversial results, for example,
yeah,
some beneficial results in more wide framework,
mhm,
but something very disturbing in some short term
yeah, yeah.
prediction. So it will be hard to synthesize all this data.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I totally agree with you. But I feel if the teacher who's teaching the methods or the techniques or wherever the student is learning from, gets a good understanding on how they work, I feel it's okay. But you are right that there's always going to be maybe mitigating factors in some kind of way. Somebody could be having a very, very good transit, for example, just as an example, somebody could be having a very positive time, or whether whatever technique you're using, whether it's transits or otherwise, and the chart may be showing that this person is going through a very good time, but maybe they're in a country that is going through upheaval. You
Mhm.
understand? So again, there are mitigating factors. It still doesn't take away that the person is going through a very good time and they're going to experience a very good time. But maybe there are other circumstances around them, and we can maybe see that okay, you seem to be having this Saturnian kind of constrictive, but you're having this Jupiter also as well. So two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Two things can be happening simultaneously. You could be riding along the road in your car and your tire bursts. But at the same time, you get somebody who comes and helps you and gives you a new tire or helps you change your tire. So two things can be,
Yes, I have seen myself a lot of such things in
yeah,
astrology. The only question is how are we able to detect all this, to describe all this,
yeah,
to see how those different controversial factors really work together. I think
mhm,
that's all the art because to
yes,
remember correspondences is not a great thing. It's rather
yeah,
easy. But to know how to use this knowledge, how to find in
yeah,
our real life all those factors and
yeah,
influences, how to combine them in the full picture,
yeah,
that's
definitely.
the real challenge.
Yeah. So, but I mean, so because for you, for example, how many techniques would you say you? I mean, I think every astrologer has their um, the part which they like the most, but that's a personal thing. I think that's everybody. Nobody's
Yeah.
excluded from that. Everybody maybe likes a particular method or a particular technique. But the question I just wanted to put to you is how many from a timing perspective, how many techniques do you use, and do you find them conflicting with each other, or do you find them like, oh, they always just tend to work in that way, or how many techniques do you use, and do you find that the techniques that you are using, do you find it tricky, and do you feel like maybe it would be better if you had just maybe one or two?
It can be tricky. I use three techniques in general.
You're right.
Secondary progression,
Yes.
which is also called the slow progression in
Yes.
our schools of astrology, and
Okay.
quick progression, which is more concentrated on months rather than years.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And let's explain that slow progression is 1 day for 1 year,
Yeah. Yes.
and quick progression is 1 day for 12 days.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
the transits, of course. I think transits is something that every astrologer uses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yes, I'm satisfied with those three techniques. I also try to use different solar returns,
Yes.
lunar returns. I personally didn't get much out of
Out
this.
of them, right? Yes.
Maybe some other astrologer will explain how do they use it. I can say about myself that I didn't receive much out of this.
Yes.
So those three techniques which I mentioned, they can sometimes
Yes.
compete with each other. For example,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
but here I have at least some clear hierarchy that
Yes.
slow progression is really what gives the essence of what will happen.
Right.
So if
Okay.
the slow progression is positive, I believe that it will be positive, despite that transits may show something different.
Different. Okay. Okay. Okay.
So that's my approach. It uh, works rather nice, we can say, but still with exceptions, as
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Sometimes
Of course.
there are situations which it's hard to explain.
And yeah.
I think all these discussions between astrologers about how can we really treat different situations according to such techniques or others, it can be
Yeah.
very fruitful, very useful for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
I
Definitely.
remember, by the way, maybe I will just bring it as a little example. You
Yes.
remember we once have discussed the book of Geoffrey Cornelius, The Moment of Astrology.
Yeah. Your moment of yeah.
Yes, he has passed already,
Yes. Yes.
and I remember that the book was interesting. It by itself, it was very interesting. Very, I can say that he has put a lot of information inside.
It's yes.
But I was very surprised when he has spoken about the death of British Princess Diana.
Right. Yes. Diana.
He mentioned, like, by the way, he mentioned that with the traditional or most well-known astrological techniques, you will find no signs of her death. I was
Right.
very surprised because I have studied her chart as well as many others.
Yes.
As you know, I like to study death charts,
Yeah.
to study how death happens in astrological mirror.
Yeah.
And I can say there are so many signs of her death, so many signs. I was very surprised that he didn't notice them, despite he looks like a very experienced astrologer.
Hey, he is a very experienced
Yes,
astrologer, or was. Yeah. Yeah.
that just
Yeah.
shows how differently people look on the same.
Yeah, well, maybe he's looking at different techniques, and it's more than likely that maybe the things that you saw that you feel confirmed for you a death is something that he may argue I can show you that same thing in another chart, and the person didn't die. So again, we're back again to what you were suggesting earlier on as to we need some clear kind of definition,
Yes,
because
some criteria.
yeah, your criteria, and just like what you said with the music, people will hear the same thing, but they get affected in different ways emotionally. So the same also seems like it's that appears in astrology, and quite rightly so. I will have a Saturn transit, and you will have a Saturn transit, the same kind of Saturn transit, conjunction or square or whatever, but we would respond to it differently.
Yes, I
Uh,
agree.
yeah,
It reminds me of our different conversations which took place
yeah,
earlier
yeah,
already about what is necessary, what is more like probably,
yeah.
or I can respond that you're right that if even if you see some factors showing death, it doesn't say that this death will come necessarily.
Right, yeah,
But it still makes this outcome rather probable.
yes,
That's
yeah,
just what I
okay,
say. That's
yeah,
just what I say. So
yeah,
if you see in some chart, like this chart of the princess, uh, such aspects as you see in progressions and transits, certainly you will not say to her, "You will die, dear princess."
yeah, yeah,
Nobody
of
will
course
say
not.
so.
Yeah, of course, yeah, of
But
course, yeah,
you will think that in such circumstances, in such astrological circumstances in the chart, the death will be rather probable, rather possible outcome. So if somebody will come and say, I don't see any sign of death,
Right. Yeah.
it says that he's blind, that he doesn't look in the chart.
Well, not necessarily. It all depends again on the methodology or the techniques. But then what I would then say to you, or the question I would put to you then would be, do you feel that maybe we may have to relook at maybe because you said, okay, a possible death perhaps in the chart or something like that. Is it possible that maybe we may have to look at because maybe we need to re-look at the word death. What does death really mean, and how you understand, and how because people go through a death-like state, so to speak. So we could see a chart, maybe somebody where there is going to be some, let's say, some a point of crisis. Let's put it like that. Now, a point of crisis could manifest in so many different ways. It could actually manifest for somebody in a particular way that is actually even worse than death as we know it. You understand? So it's actually even worse. But because the person is alive, we don't classify that. Well, what that person has actually just gone through is actually, they may have been better dying. So maybe there may be some approaches or understanding that we may have to relook at that. And
Yes, I agree. It is
you know,
death is not. It's just one form of those energies which we speak about. We
yeah,
don't speak about. Well, if our listeners know more about systems of houses, we speak more about eighth house, which is in
yes,
all
yeah,
the systems is responsible for death,
yes,
but it's also responsible for many other things.
hmm,
So yes, that's the question of definitions, as we
hmm,
said. We need to define properly all kinds of energy, what they are themselves. And
yes,
then the next question, how do they manifest themselves in our lives,
yeah,
which is much more complex,
yeah,
which can be also dependent on different other factors
yeah,
of non-astrological nature, let's say.
hmm,
So yes, I agree. This is the topic for a long discussion. Maybe we shall discuss this
hmm,
later in some of our
yeah,
sessions.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
Probably yes. Maybe we can finish now, and
uh,
only if you would like to say something in the end.
no, no, not at all. I was just going to say something about the eighth house there because,
Yes.
again, looking at it from a traditional or medieval perspective, I think it's also important to see how even the interpretations of, and not just the eighth house, but throughout astrology, again, as time has gone and evolved, how certain houses have taken on other understandings and meanings and interpretations also as well. So not just the eighth house, but I was going towards the eighth house because you mentioned it, and you mentioned again about the death. So again, from a traditional standpoint or from certain approaches, the eighth house would not be looked at as death. It's talking about a different kind of thing. It may have been to do with how you were going to die, but necessarily when you're going to die, because everybody has an eighth house, of course, and it can get activated at any particular time. But there are other parts of the chart that can indicate "quote unquote" death in some kind of way.
Well, let's take this as some
Yeah,
topic for our future
yeah,
discussions.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
can
Perhaps, yeah,
be
yeah,
very
yeah,
interesting
definitely,
for us and
yeah,
for our listeners. It
yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Uh,
Oh, all right.
uh,
So let's for today
for
we
today, we finish it
say
there,
goodbye.
and we'll continue.
Yes, we shall continue next
So,
time.
and for anybody listening, if you want to make any comments or get in touch, or if you wanted to add to maybe what anything either one of us has said, whether you agree, disagree, or you just want to add some info to it, or maybe ask a question to elaborate, yeah, be sure to comment whatever platform you're watching this on. So, yeah,
Yes, please give your opinions and ask questions. We are
yeah,
always glad to engage in discussions.
yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you very much, guys.